Hey everyone, welcome to the video. This one we're going over my first look for week 15 of the NFL season, and I know what you're probably thinking, why is this video coming out on Sunday night? Well, I have finals starting tomorrow, so I have like a sporadic schedule where I have to go to school, come back, go to school, come back, and then I got some presentations to do. So I'm going to be pretty busy tomorrow, and then I'll be done on Wednesday. So I'm just going to get this out. We're going to skip the recap portion of this just to make this video quicker instead of like it being a 40-minute video because I got some stuff to do. But I did want to go over my first look, guys, just run through the list, my first initial reactions of the salaries on this slate, the matchups, guys who I think are in good spots, guys who I think might be a little bit too cheap, and we'll just go over my first reactions. We'll try to put a lineup together and see how it flows. And again, just take this with a grain of salt because this is just my first initial reactions. We'll get into some more deeper research and analytics stuff later on into the week. Then we'll do the lineup builder as per usual, and then we'll go from there. But anyway, before we continue, if you guys could leave a like, and if you're new to the channel, please hit that subscribe button. It really helps me out. I really appreciate it. Also follow me on Twitter at ChrisPennell16. And if you're interested in any of my extra content I do on my Patreon, links all in the description below, my spreadsheets, my Discord, all the good stuff. I also do NBA every single night. And without further ado, I say we get right into it. So we're just going to run down the list here. We're going to look at some guys I think have some interest. To me, I already did a quick run through, but there's some guys I probably missed. So just from looking at the quarterback position this week, it doesn't look like I have to pay absolute top dollar because I'm not going to play Mahomes versus Denver. Now, I'm not saying Denver's actually been pretty leaky to the quarterback position lately. We just saw Deshaun Watson put up 30-plus points versus them, and Denver actually was blowing those guys out of the water. Garbage time pretty much saved him, but Patrick Mahomes is 7,100. Not someone I have a lot of interest in. He actually, besides like 4 games this year, he's not really been Patrick Mahomes, really. Like from last year, I should say. He had 30 points the first 3 weeks versus Jacksonville, Oakland, Baltimore. After that, 21, 21, 27, 32 was great versus Tennessee. Then 16, 19, 14. Kind of disappointing. That's not someone I really want to pay top dollar for. Yes, I know it's Patrick Mahomes and he can top up at any moment, but I just think there's better matchups and at cheaper price points than paying up all the way for Patrick Mahomes this week. And there's no Lamar Jackson, so I don't feel the need to spend up at quarterback all the way this week. There's some good 6.5, around that range price points, so we'll go over them in a little bit. Russell Wilson, I have more interest in Chris Carson in this game, so we'll talk about him in a little bit. Jameis Winston, he's dealing with a hand injury. There was a report that he got benched, which I was thinking maybe he just got benched for poor play, but it actually turned up into a hand injury, but it says a little bitty fracture in his right thumb, so I'm going to assume he's fine. Bruce Arians says it's nothing serious. Ended up coming back in that game. It was an ugly game for him, but it's a classic Jameis Winston game. He has a whole bunch of turnovers, and he comes in, throws 4 touchdowns, gets a rushing touchdown, 40 fantasy points, over 400 yards passing. That's just your Jameis Winston style kind of game. It looks ugly, but if you look at the end result, it usually turns out pretty good for fantasy purposes. It was actually a pretty good matchup versus Detroit, so I would have some interest in Jameis Winston. Now, is he priced to the moon? Yes, I do have a hard time paying $6,900 for Jameis Winston, but I do definitely think he's going to be in play this week versus Detroit. They are one of the worst defenses in the NFL right now, and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers don't have too much of a run game, so I could see him having a pretty good game. I know Mike Evans got banged up, so we'll have to see how he's feeling. If no Mike Evans would definitely hurt, but Jameis Winston on a short list for me right now. But Deshaun Watson, he's looking like my favorite spend up option. I say spend up. I actually like the next 3 quarterbacks a lot. I feel like I'm going to end up using one of these 3 next week. But again, it's only like Sunday night, so obviously a lot of things are going to change by then. But just first initial reactions, I love Deshaun Watson a lot here. So I thought he was a pretty good cash game play this week, and he ended up scoring 30 fantasy points. Now, this was aided from, playing catch up the entire game. The end result of this game is not reflective of how this game actually went. So the end result was 38-24, but at one point, these guys were down 31-3. Was it 38-3 at one point? I don't know if it got that bad, but I know it was 31-3 at one point. These guys were just getting blown out. He ended up saving his day at the end. He had garbage time. He had 2 rushing touchdowns. One was really awesome. He jumped in the air, got hit, extended the ball, touchdown. It was pretty sweet. Had 50 passing attempts. Not something I was going to expect. He lost to Will Fuller, but hey, it didn't matter. Deshaun Watson had a really fantastic game here. But this is actually one of my favorite games of the week right now. Just looking on paper, we have a 48 over-under, which is, I believe it's the second highest total on the slate right now. So, Yeah, second highest total on the slate. And there's not a lot of great games here, and I honestly think this Houston-Tennessee game is going to be pretty good for fantasy purposes. And it's a divisional game, and I think points are going to be scored. And I definitely like the passing attack for the Houston Texans here. It is really tough to run on the Texans. They have, I think, their top 5 DVOA versus the run, but when it comes to the pass, I believe they're like mid-20s DVOA versus the pass. So this is definitely a beatable matchup versus the Tennessee Titans. Now they're pretty much middle of the road when it comes to the points given up to quarterbacks, but we just saw 5K Derek Carr have a pretty good game. He scored 20 fantasy points versus this Titans defense. Deshaun Watson, I don't know if he's going to have Will Fuller back. If he has Will Fuller back, it's only going to help him because he's going to have that deep threat. He's got arguably the best wide receiver in the game in DeAndre Hopkins, and he also has, Kenny Stills. So I think Deshaun Watson is a fantastic option this week, and I have no problem going right back to the well. His price only went up 300, and it's a better matchup than it was last week. Now, I do prefer playing Deshaun Watson at home, but he's had some good games on the road as well this year, and I think this could be one of the best games for fantasy purposes this week. So Deshaun Watson, definitely, I think he's going to be my QB1 as of right now, just based off price and matchup. Then Ryan Tannehill, other side of this game, he has been awesome. He was in my core plays video, ended up scoring 31 fantasy points, and the guy has been excellent this year, and this is a great matchup versus Houston. And like I said, this game's got the second highest over-under, only behind the Carolina-Seattle game as of right now. Tennessee actually is 3-point favorites here, so they're expected points to be scored here. They're playing at home, and he's coming off a monster game where he had 391 yards. He had that really long touchdown to A.J. Brown, 3 touchdowns, 4 carries, 19 yards. Pretty good day for Ryan Tannehill. And he honestly, since he's been the starter, he's been one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. I mean, it's weird to say, but Tannehill has been pretty darn good. I think he has the highest passer rating in the NFL. I believe he's leading the league in yards per attempt. So he's not just some dink and dunk quarterback right now. He is going down the field, and that's evidence of A.J. Brown. So I think Ryan Tannehill, I think he's going to be a pretty good option this week, and I have no problem paying $6,500 for him. I know the price is getting up there, but he's been really good, and I'd rather throw in the Texans than run. I mean, I think Derrick Henry's going to be fine, but you can really beat the Texans through the air right now. They're giving up the 5th most fantasy points to quarterbacks this season at 23.5 points per game. We just saw Drew Lock, of all people. Drew Lock had a fantastic game this week, so this defense is not good. I think this is going to be one of the better games for fantasy purposes. Ryan Tannehill, definitely like him heading into the weekend as of right now. And then little homer pick here, but Baker Mayfield going up against the Arizona Cardinals. Last game versus Cincinnati, which should have been a good matchup for him. He didn't do anything. He had 12 fantasy points, 0 passing touchdowns, 2 picks. One was deflected, or did they ever count? Did they count that David Njoku fumble or a pick? I don't even remember. But either way, it was not the greatest game from Baker Mayfield. He did have a rushing touchdown. If he didn't have that rushing touchdown, we're looking at like a 5-point game. But it's going up against the Cardinals, and everyone has a good game versus the Cardinals. I know Devlin Hodges was pretty disappointing. I think he had 158 passing yards and 1 touchdown. But I trust the Browns offense more than the Steelers offense. Now, the Browns offense has obviously not been great, but we got good pieces, and everyone mostly does good versus the Cardinals. They're giving up the most points per game to quarterbacks, 27.7 points per game to the position this season. I don't see how we can't have at least Baker Mayfield on our radar. He's got good options to throw to. He's got Odell. He's got Jarvis Landry. He got David Njoku back. And, there's Siv versus the tight end position. He's got Kareem Hunt out of the backfield. He's got Nick Chubb. Not really a pass catcher much, but, the skill's there. And it could show up here versus Arizona. This game has a pretty healthy 47.5. Just 47 straight, 47 point over under, which is honestly, it doesn't sound like a lot, but on this slate, there's not a lot of high scoring games, and that's pretty, I think it's top 5 right now. So I think this could be a source of fantasy points on this slate, at least a good source of fantasy points on this slate. And it's also the late game at 4:05, not the technical late game at 4:25, but it's still a late game, so you get late exposure. And I always like having late exposure. Like when I have all my guys playing at 1 o'clock, I don't like that because I'm like, I'm going to lose money. Just guaranteed. That's just how it goes. But, Baker Mayfield going up against Arizona. I believe they're 28th DVOA versus the pass. This is a really good matchup for Baker. So I think this could be one of those games like he had versus Miami where he has, 3 passing touchdowns, 27 fantasy points. Would not surprise me whatsoever. I think Jarvis Landry eats in this matchup. David Njoku might be able to get into the end zone. Maybe he throws a touchdown to Kareem Hunt. Odell hopefully would get involved. So Baker Mayfield, I think he's a pretty solid play this week at 6,400. So I think as of right now, these are my 3 favorite options at quarterback. They don't break the bank. They don't save a ton of salary, but, not bad prices, and they're all within 400 salary of each other. And then just scrolling down the list here, Ryan Fitzpatrick, we'll have to see if Devontae Parker's in. If Devontae Parker's back, I think he's a solid option versus the Giants. We know how bad their pass defense is. So I wouldn't hate that. Carson Wentz versus Washington. He's been a little inconsistent. Not a little. He's been very inconsistent this year. So I think there's just better. I'd rather pay 200 more for Baker Mayfield. Jimmy Garoppolo versus Atlanta. That's interesting. And that game versus New Orleans was absolutely nuts. I hope you guys watched that. I was watching the Browns game because I'm always going to watch the Browns no matter what. But I was flipping through Red Zone on my laptop, and I feel like every time I looked at Red Zone, it was this game. There was highlights everywhere. Tebow Samuel, Emmanuel Sanders, and of course everyone goes off in this game besides Alvin Kamara because that's just how things work sometimes, I guess, right? But yeah, 32 points versus New Orleans. Atlanta's one of the worst pass defenses in the NFL. They're allowing 23.8 points per game to quarterbacks, which is third most in the NFL. I don't typically like to play Jimmy Garoppolo, but 6,100, this team's pretty good, and they're capable of big games. I shouldn't say I worry about Atlanta being able to keep up. They got Austin Hooper back, and honestly, but the 49ers defense is pretty good, but it could be a sneaky shootout. We'll see. It depends how the 49ers defense is, or if the Atlanta offensive line can hold up. But I think Jimmy Garoppolo, at least on a short list for me. I'd much rather play the other three quarterbacks I already talked about. But Jimmy Garoppolo versus Atlanta, not the worst play in the world. Over/under in this game is 46.5, which is not too bad. But 49ers are 11-point favorites, so I could see a scenario where Jimmy Garoppolo doesn't have to throw the ball too much and they just run the ball out, which they love to run the ball. So that could be a concern for Jimmy Garoppolo. Tom Brady, I just don't play Tom Brady. There's never really a lot of upside with that guy anymore. Mitch Trubisky, I know he had a great game, but no thank you. Kirk Cousins, I like Kirk Cousins, and I think he's a good quarterback, but don't love it versus the Chargers. I prefer running backs versus the Chargers. Matt Ryan versus the 49ers, no thanks. Now, Drew Lock, like I said, I don't have interest in him this week, but, he had a pretty good game versus Houston. 309 yards, 27 fantasy points, but not on my radar. But Phillip Rivers, he's got a good matchup versus Minnesota. He finally had a good game. He had 27 points, but I think there's just better options. Although he's not the worst pump play because, Minnesota's been pretty bad versus the past this season, but I just think there's better options. Gardner Minshew, it's a good matchup versus Oakland, but I'm going to have to pass there. Kyle Allen, he's had some pretty good games, and Seattle's not the worst matchup in the world. They're pretty below average when it comes to quarterbacks. I believe they're a little bit below average, so it's a good matchup for Kyle Allen. He's had 3 straight 20-point outings. All of the rushing touchdowns, he's had 2 rushing touchdowns the past 2 games. I don't think that keeps up. And he did vulture a Christian McCaffrey touchdown, which I could have used today, but 5,400, I guess he's not the worst play in the world. This game actually does have a 48.5 point over-under, which is actually highest on the slate as of right now. I expect them to be trailing, so maybe Kyle Allen's not the worst GPP play in the world. I'd have a tough time playing him in cash because the guy loves to turn the ball over, but could be an interesting GPP option. David Blau, he's got the great matchup versus Tampa Bay, but I really can't trust the guy. He came back down to earth. I know everyone was hyped about him on Thanksgiving, but 1 touchdown, 2 picks, 205 yards. It's a good matchup, though. He is pretty cheap, but I just don't think I could pull the trigger. I assume Daniel Jones will be back, and depending on how Eli plays, if Eli Manning comes out and has a pretty good game versus Philly, and he ends up starting versus Miami, hey, he could become a decent play at 5,200 because the guy's got good options. He's got Sterling Shepard, he's got Golden Tate, Saquon Barkley. Who knows if Evan Engram will ever be back. So he's got good options, but I have no idea who's going to be starting right now. And I think that's as low as I can go. So as of right now, I'm really looking at Deshaun Watson, Ryan Tannehill, Baker Mayfield as of right now. Oh, I guess we should probably make a lineup, huh? So let's plug in Baker as of right now. I prefer Deshaun Watson. We'll see, though. We'll see. But starting at the running back position, Christian McCaffrey has screwed me 2 weeks in a row. I shouldn't say he screwed me. It felt like he screwed me, then he made up for it in garbage time. He really made up for it in garbage time because he had 10 points at one point late in the game. Ended up with 24, which isn't too bad, but still, when you're paying $10,300 for someone, it's pretty disappointing. You need 30-plus points out of McCaffrey, and honestly, I wish he was a little bit cheaper because I feel like he's going to go low on this week because he's kind of screwed us 2 weeks in a row, so I don't feel like he's an absolute lock, and I still think he'll be fine, and this is the highest over-under game of the week, but I don't know. I don't feel the need to pay all the way up for Christian McCaffrey this week, but obviously he's going to be a fine play. But 24 targets the past 2 weeks. It doesn't matter the game script. He'll be fine. They were getting blown out versus Atlanta, and they got blown out versus Atlanta last game too. But he's still fine. Good matchup. Not a great matchup versus Seattle, not the worst matchup in the world, but it doesn't really matter about matchups. I mean, the guy had, 34 points versus New Orleans. I just don't think he's a necessity this week. We'll see, but as of right now, I'm not feeling the past. There's been some slates I just open up the DraftKings app and I'm like, yeah, we should probably play Christian McCaffrey this week. I'm not getting that vibe this week. Dalvin Cook, it's a good matchup versus the Chargers, but fun fact, he actually hasn't had a run over 9 yards in 3. I think it was actually in the DraftKings thing. No, it doesn't say, but he is. For the third consecutive game, he's actually failed to have a run of over 9 yards. Doesn't really mean much, but he has not. Well, I guess it does mean something. He hasn't really had those big explosive plays, which we've come to accustomed to earlier in the season. And, past 3 weeks, 16, 14, 15. He is a big discount off of Christian McCaffrey, and I think he's going to be fine. But, I mean, it's a good matchup versus LA. I mean, they're mid-20s DVOA versus the run. One of the worst teams versus running back, so I understand wanting to play Dalvin Cook, but I do think there's some cheaper options that I have more interest in as of right now. Derrick Henry, the guy is just an absolute monster. I mean, the guy's just a beast. 26, 27, 32, 36, 24, 8. I mean, since week 9? Since week 9, he has been on an absolute tear. They are riding the hot hand here, and they've been winning. They've won since week 10, they haven't lost. KC, Jacksonville, Indianapolis, Oakland. The guy's been an absolute monster. I prefer the passing attack versus Houston, so I'll probably pass here, but it would not surprise me if he has another huge game. So, yeah, Derrick Henry, it would be fine. Nick Chubb, the guy's just a machine. You're going to get about 100-plus yards every single game, probably get into the end zone. You're going to get 20-plus touches. That's just what he does. I know the week versus Pittsburgh only had 58 yards, but still, he's pretty solid pretty much every single week. It's a good matchup versus Arizona. But I do prefer the passing attack here, and if I'm playing Baker Mayfield, probably don't want to play Nick Chubb. Just doesn't have the best correlation in the world. Zeke, not really too interested in Zeke, but I do like Saquon Barkley here going up against the Miami Dolphins. Would I like it if Eli was still starting? Yes, because Eli Manning is the dump-off king. I just talked about that in my showdown video. The guy dumps the ball off like no other. It would not surprise me if Saquon Barkley has 10-plus catches in this game versus Philly coming up. But gotta like Saquon here. He's pretty cheap at $7,700. His price did rise a little bit from last week. But going up against the Miami Dolphins, they are allowing the 4th most points per game to running backs at 28.6 points per game. He's going to get 20-plus touches. I mean, the Giants should be able to keep this game close. They might be able to win this game, to be honest. And I think he finally gets into the end zone. The guy has not scored a touchdown since, week 8? It's been a while. I think he's due here. It's a great matchup versus Miami, and Bilal Powell had a pretty decent game versus these guys. And if he can, I too think Saquon Barkley can as well. Get a drink. I don't know if you guys, my showdown video I mentioned, I got a really sore throat, so. But anyway, yeah, I think Saquon Barkley at 7,700. I'm liking him quite a bit, and honestly, I think he can compete with the upside of guys like Derrick Henry, Nick Chubb, Dalvin Cook, Christian McCaffrey this week. So Saquon Barkley, I think he's a fine RB1 option this week. Then going down the list here, I think Fournette's a fine option versus Oakland, but he did have a really disappointing game versus Los Angeles, who they just played. It was a good matchup. He had his worst game of the season. Finally stopped that double-digit streak with 9.3 fantasy points at 6 targets, which I know feels like a lot, but compared to his last few games, not a lot. But still 15 attempts. He had over 20 opportunities. Just didn't turn into much versus the Chargers, and they got absolutely blown out. So we'll give him a pass there, especially with a huge blowout like that. But still, I would have expected more points out of Leonard Fournette in this matchup. But Chris Carson, he is the guy I'm looking at to load up at this week. So Rashad Penny, he exited the game and they quickly rolled him out. And David Chow, the doctor on Twitter, I saw a tweet where he mentioned he's fears an ACL injury. I cannot imagine Rashad Penny's going to play in this game. So Chris Carson, we can load him back up. I mean, back when he was just the only running back, we were playing him pretty much every single week. Now he was a lot cheaper, and DraftKings was really mean and priced him all the way up to $7,500. I know he had a good game versus Minnesota, but the pricing came out before Rashad Penny got hurt, I believe. I think so. Maybe it didn't, but even if it did, 7,500, man, they gave us a really tough price. If he was in the 6K range, he is a absolute lock. 7,500, gotta make you think a little bit about it. But still, this is a great matchup versus Carolina. I believe they're 31st DVOA versus the run. I know Jacksonville's worst DVOA, but we saw Devonta Freeman have a really good game versus these guys just hours ago. Chris Carson, I think he's going to be fine here. Panthers are giving up the second most points per game to running backs, 30.7 points. No Rashad Penny is the big thing here. He's going to get probably around 5 targets, probably over 20 carries with no Rashad Penny. He's going to see the majority of the snaps. We got the highest over-under on this slate at 48.5. They are 5.5 point favorites. Not at home at Carolina, but still, I think Chris Carson's a fantastic play this week. I think most of the points come on the ground for Seattle. I know they love to run the ball, and that's what they can definitely do versus Carolina. Teams can run the ball versus Carolina every single week. I even saw Brian Hill, of all people, break off a big run versus these guys earlier in the day. So Chris Carson, 7,500. He's looking like a really strong option, especially with no Rashad Penny. If Penny somehow happened to play, I probably wouldn't have too much interest in 7,500. But if he's the lone running back, going to give me 20 plus touches versus Carolina, I will take it. So we're going to put him in as of right now. So I feel pretty good about my 2 running backs. We got Saquon Barkley, we got Chris Carson, and we'll still talk about some running backs. So going down the list, Aaron Jones, he had a really good game. Not too interested at versus Chicago. Josh Jacobs is dealing with that fracture, so we'll see if I can't imagine he's going to play. I mean, he's got a fractured shoulder, right? Shoulder plate or something. He's going to get the MRI, but yeah, fractured shoulder plate. He's going to have an MRI scheduled coming this week. I can't imagine he'll play. I don't see the reason to play. The Raiders aren't going to make the playoffs, so why would you just have your first round pick get their arm falling off? I don't think there's a reason to push him out there. Obviously, he's been great this season, but I'm going to go under the assumption he's not going to play, and that's going to make me very interested in DeAndre Washington, which we'll talk about him when we get there. But DeAndre Washington definitely would be a pretty solid play as long as Josh Jacobs does not play, because they have a great matchup versus Jacksonville, which we'll talk about when we get there. So Austin Eckler and Melvin Gordon, I usually tend to stay away from that situation, although they both had some pretty solid games last week, I will say that. Kareem Hunt versus Arizona is interesting. He's not had a game less than double digits so far since he has played 14, 11, 12, 17, 14. I just have a hard time paying someone for 6,300. That's he's the secondary back to Nick Chubb. Kareem Hunt's obviously a great running back, but I just have a hard time paying 6,300 for a running back that's not going to get the full complement of touches behind Nick Chubb. Joe Mixon, I'm going to stay away from Cincinnati versus New England. I don't see a reason to go there. Todd Gurley is very cheap. Going up against Dallas, though, he did have 21 points last night going up against Seattle. I mean, they made it a point to give him the ball, and honestly, he's pretty cheap, so I would have to say I guess I do have some interest versus Dallas. It's a tougher matchup versus Dallas, but we've seen running backs have some solid games versus them this season. We saw Devin Singletary have a good game. Now, most of that was from that trick play down the sideline. But still, I mean, Todd Gurley's talented. Obviously, he's not the running back he was last season, but if he's going to give me 20-plus touches, 6K is not too bad, but don't have a ton of it. I just have a hard time trusting Todd Gurley. But, 20-plus touches, 6,000, a guy like Todd Gurley's pedigree, not the worst play, but not a core play for me as of right now. We'll see. But Miles Sanders, 5,900 versus Washington. Jordan Howard might be back at that point, so probably not going to be too interested. Devonta Freeman versus San Francisco, I will pass. Philip Lindsay, it's a good matchup versus KC, but I just don't like timeshare running backs too much. And Alvin Kamara timeshares are getting into my head right now. He really stunk it up this week for me. David Montgomery, he's got a great matchup versus Green Bay. The volume's there, but the talent's lacking. I'll say that. And if he doesn't score a touchdown, you're pretty much disappointed with David Montgomery, and they might have a tough time hanging in this game, although they're only 5-point underdogs, so might not be the worst play in the world, especially if he can get to the end zone. James White's consistent every single week. You know what you're going to get. You're going to get your targets. I really don't see him having to do too much versus Cincinnati, but we'll see. Let's see. Just going down the list here. Don't have a ton of interest in any of these guys. Let's see if they have an update on Rashad Penny yet. Significant ACL sprain in his post-game interview. So, yeah, they're saying it's going to look like a multi-week absence. I cannot imagine Rashad Penny is going to play. So, Chris Carson, definitely pretty much I wouldn't say he's an auto play, but definitely a really great play versus Carolina this week at 7,500. And so where's DeAndre Washington? Isn't he 47? Yeah, DeAndre Washington. So he's 4,700, and I do have interest here. So if Josh Jacobs was 4,700 versus Jacksonville, I'd have a ton of interest. Obviously, he's not the same caliber of player as Josh Jacobs. So let's just say Josh Jacobs was 6,400 versus Jacksonville. Yeah, I'd have a ton of interest. So DeAndre Washington at 4,700. Not too bad of a play here. Now, they did get blown out, so they really couldn't establish the run too much, but the guy was pretty good. He had 7 targets, 6 catches. That's what I like on our running backs. He was a good pass catcher. Jalen Richard was involved as well, but he had the most targets on the team for the running back position. He ended up having 14 carries, 53 yards, so he got me 21 opportunities. I will take that from a running back at 4,700. Going up against Jacksonville, he did get into the end zone. Jacksonville is 32nd DVOA versus the run this season. They're also allowing 27.7 points per game to running backs, which is bottom 10 in the league. DeAndre Washington, as long as Josh Jacobs is out, pretty solid flex option in my opinion. I like playing running backs versus Jacksonville. It tends to work out pretty much every single week. So assuming Josh Jacobs is out, we could plug in DeAndre Washington for 4,700. If you're going to give me 20 touches, I will take it. So especially some passing game work as well, which is something that lacks from Josh Jacobs. So don't mind DeAndre Washington here. Now we can get to the wide receiver position. I think DeAndre Hopkins is the wide receiver 1 this week. He balled out versus Denver, 13 targets, 7 catches, 1 touchdown, 29 yards. The touchdown was on a play where the Denver Broncos forgot to guard DeAndre Hopkins. That's happened a couple of times this season. Defenses just forget to guard the guy. I don't know what happens, but it's just happened a couple of times now. But what game was that where defense completely forgot about it? It might have been Indianapolis, I think. That was the Thursday night game, I think. Yeah, the defense just completely forgot about him. But yeah, going up against Tennessee, it's much easier to pass on these guys. We've seen big games from wide receivers versus Tennessee for weeks now. Oakland really didn't do much, but I like this game for fantasy purposes. I think DeAndre Hopkins has a pretty big game versus Tennessee. So I like him. And then Chris Godwin versus Detroit. Now he mainly runs out of the slot, and Detroit's slot corner is Justin Coleman, and that guy is absolute trash. You guys saw what Anthony Miller did to him. Here, I'll pull up Anthony Miller versus Detroit. This was on Thanksgiving Day. Chris Godwin is a lot better than Anthony Miller. Anthony Miller had 13 targets, 9 catches, 140 yards, 26 fantasy points. I think Chris Godwin can have a pretty good game here. Justin Coleman last time I looked, he allowed the most receiving touchdowns on the year. That might have changed from the last time I looked, but again, core plays video, I'll go more in depth on there. But had 9 targets, 7 catches last week, 91 yards, 16 points. Not too bad. So Chris Godwin on my radar. He's more of a GPP option. Devontae Adams, he screwed me very, very hard this week. Tyreek Hill versus Denver, I'm probably going to pass there. I want to talk about everybody. Edelman's a safe play every single week. I mean, look, 12 targets, 11 targets, 12 targets, 10 targets, 11 targets, 11 targets, 12 targets, 15 targets, 9, 7, 10, 4, 11. Probably one of the safest plays every single week. Going up against Cincinnati, I think he'll be just fine. He's going to get you 10-plus targets. Probably going to get you close to 20 fantasy points. I like Julian Edelman here, so I wouldn't mind using him. But a guy I like quite a bit is Jarvis Landry here, because I like to pair someone up with my quarterback. And Odell, I can't trust Odell anymore. I mean, the guy's obviously talented, but he's dealing with a sports hernia injury, and he's just not connecting with Baker. It feels forced. With Landry, it's a lot more smooth, and they have better connections. I don't mind playing 300 more for a more safer commodity in Jarvis Landry. Sorry. And this is a really good matchup here versus Arizona. So, last time I looked, Arizona was giving up the most points per game to slot receivers. It was near 30 points per game. So I think Jarvis Landry, I think he can eat here. I mean, he's shown huge upside gains versus Miami at 13 targets, 10 catches, 39 fantasy points. Not saying he's going to replicate that, but the guy's been very safe week in, week out. 11, 13, 39, 14, 24, 17, 11, 6, 11, 27, 9, 6, 11. He's the wide receiver 1 of this offense. I mean, it sounds weird, but the guy's a talented wide receiver. He's got safe hands. He makes big plays. I mean, I'd have a hard time seeing him not get double-digit targets here. I think this is a pretty back-and-forth game. I don't think the Browns blow Arizona out. I think it's pretty back-and-forth. This is only a 2.5-point spread in Cleveland's favor, 47-point over-under. They're on the road in Arizona. I think Kim and Baker are a pretty good combo this week. Kind of feels like the Miami week. I think they can bust off a little bit. So definitely have some interest in Jarvis Landry. So we are going to plug him in as of right now. Then just going on the list here, you could play DJ Moore versus Seattle. The guy's been solid. Emmanuel Sanders versus Atlanta. That would make some sense at 6,600. He had a huge game versus New Orleans. The touchdown, 75-yard touchdown, 157 yards, 9 targets, 7 catches. Atlanta, one of the worst pass defenses in the NFL. He would definitely make some sense to me. They're giving up, the 5th most points per game to wide receivers? No, the 8th most. About 40 points per game to wide receivers. So, yeah, wouldn't mind Emmanuel Sanders. Cooper Kupp. I don't love the matchup versus Dallas. Murray Cooper. He is at home. He plays much better at home. Not a lot of interest versus the Rams. Parker. He's got a concussion. I don't know if he's going to end up playing or not. If he does, he should smash New York. New York is giving up the 2nd most points per game to wide receivers, 43.9 points per game. And before getting hurt, the guy's been rock solid. 10 targets, 11, 10, 10, 10. 37, 15, 23, 11, 15, 11, 16, 11, 17, 8, 0, 10 points. The guy's been great this year. So if he's good to go, I think he's an excellent option at 6,400. The price came down a little bit. So definitely keep your eye on Devontae Parker this week. Odell, he's cheap. But, this is not happening this year. This is not happening with the guy. The past 2 games, he's at 5.9 points. 6 targets versus Pittsburgh, 3 catches, 5 targets versus Cincinnati, which should have been a good matchup. 2 catches. Can't trust them. Rather play Landry. So that's just the point we are at this season. Keenan Allen's cheap. It's a good matchup versus Minnesota. 13, 18, 21, 16. It feels like he's been pretty bad since the hot start, but he's been solid, but definitely hasn't had those ceiling games. But it's a really good matchup versus Minnesota. They have one of the worst pass defenses in the NFL, allowing the 5th most points per game to wide receivers, 41.1. But I actually like his teammate better, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So let's just skip down a little bit because I feel like I've been talking forever. I'm only at the wide receiver position. So I will say A.J. Brown's priced up, but I think he's a really good option this week as more of a GPP option because he's got a lower floor. But I think this could be a high ceiling game. Houston is one of the worst pass defenses in the NFL, and we just saw them get absolutely cooked by the Broncos. And A.J. Brown, he's coming off a huge game, 2 touchdowns, had that 91-yard touchdown. That was a bomb. 7 targets, 5 catches, 36 points. Week before that, 7, then 26, 2, 12, 9, 12, 4, 3. Pretty much all over the map here, but this could be one of those games that he pops off, and I definitely think this game's going to be good for fantasy. So A.J. Brown would be a tournament option for me as of right now. Golden Tate versus Miami. That's a pretty good matchup. But Deebo Samuel's also pretty nice at 5,800. He's been very solid too. 15, 14, 13, 24, 22, 8, 13. And he's really ramped up his playing time since week 8. So I think Deebo Samuel is definitely in play for me at 5,800. The guy's just been really good, and he's a pretty good talent. So Deebo Samuel definitely on my radar as of right now. Will Fuller, I don't know if he's going to play or not. Christian Kirk, if you're going to stack Cleveland, it would make some sense to maybe run it back with Christian Kirk. I wouldn't hate the idea of doing that, but not going to make the cut for this lineup as of right now. But Mike Williams at 4,600, I think he might end up being the chalk wide receiver this week. That was just my first initial reaction, because the first thing I did when I saw that the Chargers were playing the Minnesota Vikings, first thing I thought of was, let me check out Mike Williams' price, because the guy's pretty much cheap every single week. Finally got into the end zone this week. He had 14 points. I figured they might price him out to 5K. Well, I found out he's only 4,600. So I actually think he's probably the best value wide receiver as of right now. He only had 3 targets last week, but he finally got into the end zone, and he's been honestly solid this season, especially for only having 1 touchdown. Really cheap price. 14, 19, 9, 7, 17, 9, 8, 12, 13, 7, 11, 4. We know the guy's got big play upside. He's averaging, if you just look at his longest catch per game here, look, 44, 52, 50, 45, 56, 43. These are all, he's a big play guy. He's capable of that. He's a big target. He scored 10 touchdowns last year, and the touchdowns should be coming. He finally scored versus Jacksonville, so it would not surprise me if he gets into the end zone in this game versus Minnesota. Like I said, allowing the 5th most points per game to wide receivers, 41.1 points per game. I think Mike Williams is a pretty solid play this week at 4,600, so I have no problem plugging him in. Now, at this point, options are getting slim, but we're going to do some assumptions here. Let's assume Will Fuller is out again. Hamstring injuries are tricky, but if he's in, I wouldn't play Kenny Stills. But if he's out, I like Kenny Stills here because I like DeAndre Hopkins. I like Deshaun Watson. I don't have either of them in my lineup, so that gives me a little bit of concern. I know he sucked last week. Only had 2.8 points in a game where he should have had a pretty good game. Didn't come to fruition, but I like him here versus Tennessee. It's much easier to pass on these guys, and it's just cheap exposure to this game. I think he's going to have a better game than 2 targets for 2 catches for 8 yards. I think that's pretty much as bad as it's going to get with Will Fuller being out. So Kenny Stills, I'm going to plug him in at 4,100. I think I just like getting cheap exposure to this game. Only 4,100, so I don't mind that whatsoever. So at this point, we got to find a tight end and scroll all the way up here. So Travis Kelce versus Denver. I think that's fine. I mean, he's been solid all year. I just don't love paying up for tight end, but Kelce's pretty much as solid as it gets. He's only had 1 game below double digits this season for fantasy points, but don't love it versus Denver. George Kittle's a fine option, 6,200. The guy's just, he's an elite tight end. That's what he is. He's got big play upside. It's a good matchup versus Atlanta. Definitely a good game. Jimmy Garoppolo should have a good game through the air here, as the whole 49ers should, so I wouldn't mind George Kittle. If you're spending up, Zach Ertz is always solid. Darren Waller's solid. Hunter Henry's solid. Can we afford that Hunter Henry? I wouldn't mind that. Going up against Minnesota. Minnesota's actually kind of low-key bad versus the tight end position. I shouldn't say low-key. I shouldn't say bad, but last year they were bad. They're more middle of the road this year, but they're beatable versus tight ends, so I wouldn't mind Hunter Henry, although I don't love having 2 Chargers in my lineup as of right now. But let's plug in a defense first, and we'll see what we have left. So looking at defenses, Patriots obviously stand out. 49ers stand out. Seahawks do. No, I shouldn't say the 49ers stand out. I mean, they're playing at home. They're obviously one of the best defenses in the NFL, but versus Atlanta, that might give me a little bit of caution, but Seahawks versus Carolina, probably not going to do that. Buccaneers versus Detroit on the road. Not too interested there. Browns versus Arizona, not the most interest in the world. We could look at the Packers going up against Chicago at home. This game has a 41 point over-under. That's near the lowest on the slate. So I actually don't mind the Packers defense here. They're not the best defense in the world, but they're okay. For Chicago week 1, they had 14 points. I don't trust Mitch Trubisky that much. We could plug him in at 3K. That gives us 5,300 left. That was that Hunter Henry. Yeah, we could end up playing Hunter Henry. I wouldn't mind Hunter Henry. I mean, he didn't have many targets this past 2 weeks, 4 targets and 3 targets, but besides that, he's been solid all season. I mean, 11 points, 3 points, 14, 13, 15, 8, 15, 33, 10. Targets have been there all season. I wouldn't mind Hunter Henry here. I mean, they blew the guys out, so I didn't have to pass the ball too much anyway. So I know we have 2 Chargers in here, but I actually don't mind this. And then you can just play around with the defense. I don't know if there's any cheap options I love. Don't like the Panthers. Don't like the Redskins. Don't like the Bears, really. Chargers versus Minnesota is going to be a no-go for me, even though they're at home. Detroit, I mean, they're just a disaster on defense. They are playing at home, though, but Jameis Winston likes to turn the ball over, but Jameis Winston also likes to throw the ball for 400 yards. So, yeah, I don't know. I think the Packers defense is honestly not too bad at 3K, so we'll just keep them in right now, and we'll just roll with that because, Hunter Henry's safe. It's a good matchup versus Minnesota. I know we got 2 Chargers in here, but this is just an example video, so. Oh, man, I need a cough drop so bad. Anyway, guys, that's going to do it for this video. Hope it was helpful. So we got Baker, Saquon, Carson, all good matchups. Jarvis Landry are pairing with Baker Mayfield. It's a great matchup in the slot versus Arizona. Mike Williams is cheap, got big play upside. It's a good matchup versus Minnesota. Kenny Stills, that's just an assumption of Will Fuller being out. Hunter Henry, if you can hear that, it's my dog sitting on my lap. But Hunter Henry, he fit at the end. Decent matchup versus Minnesota. DeAndre Washington, under the assumption that Josh Jacobs is out. And the Packers defense, they fit. All right, guys, I'll leave you guys with that. Sorry, I don't think this video was that quick, but I had to get this video out earlier just because I'm going to be busy tomorrow. So hope this video was helpful. If it was, remember to leave a like. If you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button. Really helps me out. Really appreciate it. Follow me on Twitter at ChrisPanel16, and I'll see you guys in the next video.